Like perhaps most of the whole world, I spent the last couple of weeks really thinking about, looking into and researching the business around Jeffrey Epstein, what he really did, what his connections with Trump were, and what is it that is really being hidden. Because just like almost everybody else, I didn't believe for a second the Trump administration's version of events, that there was nothing actually to see here, that there was no new revelations to be exposed, that there was no controversy around his death, that everything that can be released has been released and there's nothing new to see, and so move on. That didn't make sense to me, and it hasn't made sense to millions. It hasn't made sense to most, it seems, of Trump's supporters. But in addition, it hasn't made sense to most of the world. So I've gone digging, really trying to understand these characters, these people that are involved in this, and what it is they were actually up to. And I've come up with a bit of a theory and some ideas of what was actually happening behind the scenes. What is it that lies behind the veil? Now, before I go into that, I have to issue a trigger warning at the start of this video. This video and this subject matter is, of course, very delicate and very harrowing. It involves the abuse of children and some horrific, depraved acts. And that is part of what we're talking about here. So if you yourself have a history of this, or if you're triggered by any of this, please do take the space you need to step out and just be aware that this is coming up. So I just wanted to issue that trigger alert early on. Now, who was Jeffrey Epstein? There are so many questions out there about both his life and his death. How is it that somebody who didn't even have a college degree became a maths teacher in a prestigious school in the States? And how is it that someone who was just a maths teacher in school ended up becoming a billionaire with connections to vast amounts of rich and powerful people? How did each of these steps happen? None of them really make sense. And how did his death happen? That doesn't make sense either. So in this video, I'm going to piece together some evidence that's been put together. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory because the sources I'm going to use here are reputable journalists or investigative journalists and news sites that have presented their evidence clearly and their sources very openly. So I'm going to essentially bring together what appears to be out there in plain sight for us all to see. Now let's start with his ending. One of the biggest controversies is about how he died. We're supposed to believe that he committed suicide in his prison cell. And yet, there's 1 minute of video around the time that he died seems to be missing from the footage. Not only that, the footage that was released by the Trump administration was clearly edited together. They said that this was live footage, but then Wired, the respectable online publication, actually looked at it, analysed it, and found that actually no, these are clips that have been pieced together from different times, and they are not one continuous piece of live footage. So there's something very fishy about that. We're also told that the guards who sat outside and were keeping him on suicide watch at the time, the guards who sat outside his cell were doing other things, went to the toilet, shopping online, things like this. Now, I've worked in prisons. I've gone and I used to in-reach into prisons to see patients there. And this kind of thing doesn't happen. If somebody is on that kind of watch, where you have two people together watching the person, both of them simultaneously won't disappear at the same time. It's very rare, very unusual for that to happen. And in addition, as I say, the way in which they had to doctor the footage before putting it out leads to great and obvious suspicion. In fact, there are respected, highly respected journalists who are convinced that this was something that sort of official agencies were behind. Take Tina Brown, for example. She used to be editor of Vanity Fair. Then she was the founder of the Daily Beast, a highly respected, reputable journalist. And this is her answer when she was asked about what happened and what went on behind the scenes in his death. And she actually has some really pertinent information about this from one of her reporters too.
Because Conchita and I sort of stayed in touch, and she remained like a dog with a bone, like every sort of great investigator. She just remained outraged. Her outrage never went away. Anyway, so she texted me and she said, I must tell you something incredible. And I said, what's that? She said, I just was talking to one of my major FBI sources, and she is sourced up the wazoo in the FBI. She really is. She has incredible high echelon relationships in the Justice Department. And she said, he just said to me, I asked him what he thought about the Epstein arrest, and he said, Jeffrey Epstein will never make it to trial. There are towels in there. It's a chilling thing. I mean, I personally am of the persuasion that it was not suicide. I have always found it very hard to believe that it was, because he was actually, this was not long after his arrest. There was still some legal hope that he could be got out on bail. In fact, he'd had a pretty positive meeting before he killed himself with his own lawyer, telling him that he thought the chances of getting bail were, getting out on bail were actually better. So it was too early in the moment for him to really, I think, commit suicide.
So, if we're saying that his death may have been a murder rather than a suicide, then who would have murdered him? Who would have had that desire, that motive to go and do this? Well, we know that there was large numbers of people who were travelling in and out of his island. How do we know that? Well, again, Wired, the reputable online journal, did an investigation. They used a piece of software that was being used by the Defence Department, and their excellent reporting has shown there was a constant traffic of folks in and out of the island. People around the US and around the world who we don't know who they are.
This is Little St. James, aka Epstein Island. These red dots on the map represent some of the 11,279 coordinates I obtained. They were left exposed online by a location data broker with ties to the Defense Department called Near Intelligence. Between 2016 and Epstein's final arrest in 2019, Near collected data on more than 200 cell phones that visited the island. We don't know why they did that or which client or prospective client of Near decided to query the data in this way to produce the maps. But the maps you'll see in this video show where visitors to Epstein Island spent most of their time.
Now that's just the traffic in and out of his island, and of course he had some other bases. His base in Palm Beach in Florida, and also his house in New York. These are massive sprawling buildings, and again he had people coming in and out of there all the time. Let's not forget that Epstein was convicted of sex trafficking, as was Ghislaine Maxwell. But if they're convicted of sex trafficking, then who is it that they trafficked to? Who is it that this sex abuse was facilitated for? So we know that Epstein engaged in it himself, but you'd be charged of the act, the sex crime itself, only if that was all you did. But he was also charged of sex trafficking. But no one's come forward, they haven't presented us information about who it was that was trafficked to. Well, another highly respected, capable and very active investigative journalist on this front is Tara Palmieri. And she used to be the White House correspondent for the ABC, for example, now has her own channel. And she has spent a long time interviewing the victims. She interviewed many victims, including Virginia Dufresne. And she spent time getting to know them, getting to understand their stories. And what she learnt from almost all of them is that all the time they were being abused and passed around to different people, they were being videos. They knew about banks of videos being taken of people in all of these different sites with all of this different abuse going on across the board.
The point is that no one has paid the price for this, and there's absolutely evidence that hasn't been released. There's photographs, I'm sure. There are videos. The girls told me that they basically filmed everything. There were videos of everything. They were constantly collecting compromise. So I'm sure the FBI has that.
So we know that he was luring people in to these key locations, that there's large numbers of people coming in and out of these locations. We know that in addition to that, he was also recording lots of these people. So we know there's lots of stuff out there that is actually filming acts of sexual abuse, crimes on film. Now, what did he do with these videos? Well, it's also been unearthed that in between these sort of escapades of debauchery, of real depravity, he was also flying to countries around the world to conduct some kind of business. Sometimes he would fly to multiple countries in the same day, in a way that's almost impossible, given the way that sort of customs checks and things worked. But he was waved through security and multiple airports, sometimes, like I say, even in the same day.
30 plus same-day international trips where Epstein's jet, it touched down in one country at breakfast and another by dinner. Russia in the morning, Israel that night. Wheels up again before sunrise. Anyone who's ever waited in a customs line, you know you don't move that fast unless somebody's waving you through.
So he was conducting some kind of a business here. There was information that he was gathering, there were videos that he was recording, and then he was going out to various parts of the world. And we know that when he was going out to these various parts of the world, he was also engaging in multiple transactions. There are a huge number of very expensive transactions flowing back and forth into his account. How do we know that? Well, we know that from Senator Ron Wyden, who is actually pretty well connected in terms of investigative journalists, because his father was a very famous investigative journalist as well, so he has good sources. And this is what he reported on the floor of the Senate, no less, just in the last couple of days.
Last year, the Biden administration allowed our investigators to look at portions of the file. We did that at the Treasury building. Here is what it says. Treasury's Epstein file details, Mr. President, 4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking.
So what we can see here is a genuine pattern, and it starts to build up. This is a man who lured people in to his orbit. Now, I believe that there were two levels to his orbit. One level was purely networking, together with Ghislaine Maxwell, who had connections to all sorts of high-ranking people, because her father was Robert Maxwell, a little bit like Rupert Murdoch. He was a newspaper and media magnate of his own, and he had connections to politicians and rich and famous people all around the world. So she helped him create these big networks of people, including of scientists and academics and lawyers and business people and politicians. So they would have this big network of people, and that would sometimes lure people in. People would just like to be in his orbit to make use of all these connections. That was like the window dressing, if you like, that would lure some people in. Then there was the next level. Some of those people will be pulled out into the deeper level, into the level of actually engaging in some of this sexually depraved behavior. He would pick them out. Now, not everybody in his shop window, if you like, not everybody involved in the sort of networking was involved in the depraved activities. We have to be clear about that, which means that there are many people who are photographed with Epstein that had nothing to do with any of that stuff. But some of them were. He then took them into that next level of hell. Those people who had predilections like that, those people who were looking out for this kind of thing. And he picked them off, and he managed to get them into his mansions and his islands and all of these various secret places, where he then proceeded to film them, to then fly around to intelligence agencies around the world and sell them on to them too, and gain favors from them in return. This is why he's flying to Russia, he's flying to Israel, he has connections with various intelligence agencies, and almost certainly he was linked to them in that way. He wasn't working for them, so he wasn't working for Mossad, he wasn't on the payroll of CIA, any of those things. This is why they can plausibly deny and say, no, we never employed Jeffrey Epstein, he was never part of it. Well, technically that's true, but that doesn't mean that they didn't work with him. They didn't take gratefully the blackmail and the material that they received from him. Of course they did. So he was engaging in this as a way of making money. That's how he amassed so much wealth. And it takes us all the way back to Dalton School. How did a guy without even a maths degree, get a job in a highly prestigious school in the US, one of the most high-profile schools in the US? Almost certainly he blackmailed somebody in the system there to get that job. How did he then get his foothold into the sort of multi-million dollar sort of tranche of society? Well, Les Wexner, who was the owner of Victoria's Secret, who was his main patron, not only did he give him huge amounts of wealth, he handed over his power of attorney to Jeffrey Epstein. Who does that? Why would you hand over your power of attorney even to your friend? Okay, How would you do that if you weren't blackmailed for it? Now, of course, I don't know this for a fact. Now, this is conjecture. And this is a guy who made money from essentially selling lingerie and who had a number of underwear models that he worked with, some of them very, very, very young. And so who knows what his predilections and his tastes were and what he did. I can't make a direct accusation about that, but there's not a massive leap to be made there, is there? And so this massive gift that he gave Epstein, the power of attorney, which led to Epstein actually transferring assets directly from Les Wexner's estate to his own and building up his own wealth. He's unfortunate that way. And then one after the other, he continued to do that to person after person. And you see, what that led to is him actually being a broker of power. He was a literal power broker, because when you have a tape on somebody, these are almost certainly people who are highly wealthy, highly influential, highly powerful people. When you have a tape of somebody committing an absolutely illegal, unconscionable and depraved act like that, then you basically own that person. So what he's brokering with these tapes is power. And what he was handing over to the intelligence agencies is mounds of power. So these intelligence agencies, therefore, are sitting on these treasure troves of power. It gives them an enormous amount of power. Perhaps it enables them to force a tech billionaire to change their app in a particular way that enables them to do some surveillance that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. Perhaps it enables them to get a great amount of money from another of these people who's been blackmailed in order to fund one of their projects. Perhaps it enables them to get some arms from a particular arms dealer in one area. Apparently he had lots of arms dealers in his orbit, to a different country where they want to clandestinely fund and support a particular conflict. So there are all sorts of things that the intelligence agencies could be enabled to do this way, and multiple intelligence agencies, because we know that he travelled around the world, quite possibly to sell his wares in this way. And so there was a lot of very powerful intelligence agencies that had become powerful because of what he supplied them. And so good reason to make sure he never gets to testify about any of that. And also a good reason to make sure that a president, whether it's Trump or anybody else, never gets to speak about it. And actually, Trump is probably the easiest president of all to prevent investigating this. You can imagine the scene. Somebody somewhere in some intelligence agencies visit him in the Oval Office and tell him, Mr. President, if you do pursue this investigation one single step more, then we are going to put this out there. And then this could be anything. And we don't know if he was engaged directly in the despicable activities that Jeffrey Epstein engaged in and filmed others doing. We don't know that for a fact. We don't have testimony of that. But we do know that he has engaged in illegal activities, many of them, multiple times. And we do know there are also rumours about other tapes the Russians and other people might have about him, engaged in other depraved activities. So there's almost certainly some stuff out there that they could blackmail him with. It's probably a very easily blackmailable president, this one. So they threatened him. With whatever it is they had on him, they threatened him. And that then led them to get him to stop the investigation in its tracks and not release a single thing. So this tells us that the man behind the veil, Jeffrey Epstein, was essentially an apex predator. You have the original victims, the vulnerable children who are preyed on by these despicable human beings. And then you have the person who preyed on the predators, the predator of the predators. Jeffrey Epstein, the person on top of them. And being an apex predator means that you're able to prey on the predators themselves as well as the original victims. Now you see, the thing about predators in general, about sexual predators in general, is that they are actually very expert at honing in on the people who are most vulnerable. People who may have had abuse or difficulties in their childhood, and as a result of that, would present themselves in different ways. They can spot that vulnerability a mile off. They can smell that fear, that aura around them. They zoom in on those people, and they capture those people to become their latest victims of abuse. Now, Epstein not only did that, but he also became a predator of predators. In other words, he was able to look at his vast network of connections of rich and famous people and hone in on those people who he knew had these despicable weaknesses and predilections. He managed to zone in on them and promise them all sorts of things, a whole world that is hidden to everybody else, but that he can bring to them. And then he lured them in, and then he filmed them, and he blackmailed them made money from them, and continued his own depraved lifestyle, as well as funding a vast fortune. He turned blackmail into an industry in the end that ate him up. But let's not forget the real victims of this are the children who are trafficked by him. And one day, let us hope that justice is done for them when what's in those tapes is revealed to all. I hope you liked the video. I hope you also can join me with more of my content that I'm aiming to make over the coming months and years. You see, this time around, what we're experiencing in this administration is a global trauma, and the people going through it have been asking, how can we support ourselves? How can we learn and grow and share together through this process? So I've started to write a series of ebooks. That's together with my whole team. Once a month, we're going to produce an ebook to help us understand better the psychology of the people around us and the systems we're in, as well as our own psychology too, to help us navigate this increasingly confusing and disorientating world we find ourselves in. You'll be able to find those books on russellsbooks.com. That's russellsbooks.com. As soon as you go there, you'll be able to see the growing catalogue of books and hopefully buy any of them at any point. In addition, I hope you can subscribe to my e-newsletter. See, there's a link in the description of this video and also the description of the channel. And if you go there, you'll be able to fill out a form. Once you've completed the form, you'll then be able to get subscribed to my e-newsletter. And that way you can always be kept up to date about the content I'm producing. You see, the fact is that this platform, as well as all platforms, are owned by a very small number of oligarchs. And at any point, they might decide to shut down a channel like this. And if they do that, then, well, it's going to be hard for us to keep connecting. So if you sign up for my e-newsletter, that way you'll be able to make sure that you'll be informed about my content wherever it's delivered and wherever it lands. Finally, I hope you might also consider becoming a member of the channel. If you do, you'll get these ebooks for free every month. So all the ebooks I produce go free to my members who join the channel every month. Also, you can get priority response to comments, and there's also a members-only chat page for higher level members that we engage in regularly to sort of learn, share, and support one another. As I say, this is a difficult time, it's a traumatic time in history, so many of us need support from each other. I'm hoping each of these things can help all of us create a better tomorrow together. Thank you.